The evening rush at Bellamy's had just begun, and Olivia Taylor's feet were already aching. 6 hours into her double shift, she balanced 3 plates of steaming pasta along her arm while navigating between closely packed tables. The upscale restaurant, with its crystal chandeliers and mahogany furnishings, catered to Boston's elite, bankers, lawyers, and business executives who rarely noticed the people serving their food. Tonight was particularly busy. A group of Wall Street types had reserved the best table in the house to celebrate some big deal. From the snippets of conversation Olivia had overheard, it involved millions of dollars changing hands. She'd been assigned to their table despite her quiet request to her manager for a different section. "They asked for our best server," her boss had told her with a meaningful look. What he meant but didn't say was, "Don't mess this up. We need their business." At 24, Olivia had mastered the art of becoming almost invisible while working. She moved quietly, spoke softly, and kept her eyes down. Skills she'd learned through 3 years of serving entitled customers while pursuing her dream. Each tip brought her one step closer to completing her final year at the music conservatory, where she studied piano performance on a partial scholarship. As she approached the Wall Street table with their appetizers, she took a deep breath. 5 men in expensive suits sat around it, ties loosened, drinking top-shelf scotch and laughing too loudly. At the center sat a man who seemed to command the group's attention. He looked to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a custom suit that probably cost more than Olivia's entire semester's tuition. "Your appetizers, gentlemen," she said, carefully setting down plates of calamari, stuffed mushrooms, and bruschetta. 4 of the men barely glanced at her, continuing their conversation about golf handicaps, but the 5th, the one in the center, paused to look at her directly. "You're new," he said, more a statement than a question. "I've been at Bellamy's for 3 years, sir," Olivia replied with her practiced smile. He raised an eyebrow. I come here frequently. I would have remembered you." Something in his tone made her uncomfortable, not because it was flirtatious, but because it felt dismissive, as if he was surprised he hadn't noticed her before, like one might be surprised at overlooking a painting on a wall. "I'll be back to check on you shortly," she said, turning to leave. "Richard Westfield," he said to her back, causing her to pause. "Remember that name. I own half the buildings in this part of the city." Olivia turned back and nodded politely, unsure what response he expected. "Can I get you anything else for now, Mr. Westfield?" "That will be all," he replied, already turning back to his companions. She retreated to the kitchen where her co-worker Danny was plating desserts. "You got the Westfield table?" Danny whispered, eyes wide. "Good luck with that. He made Trey cry last month over a slightly undercooked steak." Olivia sighed. "Great, just what I need tonight. Just don't mess up and maybe you'll get a decent tip." Danny shrugged. "He's loaded but cheap. Classic." For the next 40 minutes, Olivia served the table without incident. The men ordered the most expensive items on the menu, another round of drinks, and barely acknowledged her presence. She was just beginning to think she might survive the night when she approached with water refills. As she leaned in to pour, the man beside Westfield pushed his chair back suddenly, bumping her arm. Water splashed across the table, a few drops landing on Westfield's sleeve. The table fell silent. "I'm so sorry." "Sir?" Olivia said immediately, already reaching for the cloth tucked in her apron pocket. "Is it really so difficult?" Westfield interrupted, his voice carrying across the now quieting restaurant. "To perform the simple task of pouring water?" Heat rushed to Olivia's face. "It was an accident, sir. Your friend moved his chair. Now it's our fault?" The cold smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, do they hire just anyone off the street here now?" The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. One checked his phone, another suddenly became very interested in his bread roll. None came to her defense. "I apologize for the spill," Olivia said evenly, though her hand trembled slightly as she dabbed at the tablecloth. "I'll have this cleaned up right away. What's your name?" Westfield asked. "Olivia, sir." "Olivia," he repeated, studying her name tag. "And where are you from, Olivia?" The question felt loaded somehow, especially with how he was looking at her now, taking in her dark skin, her curly hair pulled back in a tight bun. "I was born and raised in Boston," she answered, continuing to clean the minor spill. He said, as if this information confirmed something for him. "And is this your career of choice?" Spilling water on paying customers? One of his companions chuckled nervously, then stopped when no one joined in. I'm working to pay for school, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the burning in her chest. School? His eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. How ambitious. The restaurant had grown quieter. From the corner of her eye, Olivia could see her manager hovering nervously by the bar, clearly torn between protecting his staff and not offending a wealthy regular. Richard, one of the other men said quietly. The girl said it was an accident. Westfield ignored him, his eyes still fixed on Olivia. What are you studying that's so important? She hesitated, knowing anything she said would likely become ammunition. Music. The smile that spread across his face confirmed her fears. Music, you mean like rap or something? The racial undertone wasn't subtle. Olivia felt her fingernails digging into her palms as she forced herself to remain professional. Classical piano performance, she corrected him calmly, at the New England Conservatory. This seemed to genuinely surprise him, but only for a moment before his expression shifted to amusement. A waitress who plays classical piano, he said, looking around at his companions. How unusual. Olivia noticed that several other diners were watching now. Her manager had disappeared, probably hoping the situation would resolve itself without his intervention. The band that usually played soft jazz in the corner had taken a break, leaving an awkward silence in the restaurant except for the faint clinking of silverware. That's when Westfield noticed the grand piano sitting in the corner of the lounge area. Well, this is perfect timing, he said, his voice projecting even more now. Since you're a classical pianist, why don't you play something for us? Entertain us while we wait for our main course. Olivia froze. I'm working, sir. I have other tables. I'll speak to your manager, he replied with a wave of his hand. Consider it making up for the poor service. She looked around desperately. A few tables away, an older couple watched with concerned expressions. At another table, a woman whispered something to her companion while darting glances in their direction. I really don't think... Olivia began. What's the matter? Westfield interrupted. Suddenly shy about your talents? The way he said talents made it clear he didn't believe she had any. Or perhaps the New England Conservatory story is just something you tell customers for better tips. The accusation stung. Olivia had worked incredibly hard to get into that program, practicing for hours after exhausting shifts, her fingers sometimes so stiff she could barely move them. She spotted her manager returning, walking quickly toward their table. When he arrived, he smiled nervously. Is everything all right here? Not really, James, Westfield said, apparently on first-name terms with the manager. Your server here claims to be some sort of classical pianist. I thought it might be entertaining to hear her play. You wouldn't mind, would you? James looked between Westfield and Olivia, clearly calculating the cost of refusing a man who probably spent thousands at his restaurant each month, versus the dignity of his employee. Well, he began. I'll cover her tables, a voice said from behind them. It was Danny appearing at Olivia's side with a supportive glance. If Olivia wants to play, I mean. All eyes turned to Olivia. The choice was clear. Refuse and possibly lose her job, or play and risk further humiliation when she performed under the pressure. Either way, Westfield would win. Either she'd prove his point about her place, or she'd be too afraid to try. Olivia looked at the piano in the corner, a beautiful Steinway that the weekend pianist had left uncovered. Her fingers itched despite her anger and embarrassment. It had been weeks since she'd had time to practice properly, her course load and work schedule leaving little free time. Fine, she said quietly. Then looking directly at Westfield with a calm she didn't feel, she added, I'd be happy to play something. Any requests? He seemed momentarily thrown off by her acceptance of the challenge. Surprise us, he finally said with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Though I doubt we'll be impressed by chopsticks. The comment drew a few chuckles from his table. Olivia nodded and turned toward the piano, aware of every eye in the restaurant following her. Her heart pounded against her ribs. 3 years of working here, keeping her head down, saving every penny, all potentially ruined because of one man's need to feel superior. As she sat at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly, she took a deep breath. She could play something simple, get through this humiliation quickly. Or, her fingers hovered over the keys as she made her decision. The restaurant had fallen completely silent as Olivia sat at the piano bench. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, peering through the service window to watch. She could feel Westfield's smug gaze on her back, waiting for her to embarrass herself. 3 tables away, an elderly couple exchanged concerned glances. The woman half rose as if to intervene, but her husband gently touched her arm, shaking his head. Everyone in the restaurant seemed caught in the uncomfortable moment, unsure whether to speak up or look away. Olivia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The familiar smell of polished wood and the cool ivory keys beneath her fingers centered her. This wasn't so different from her recitals at school, she told herself. Except there, people wanted her to succeed. Here, at least one person was eagerly waiting for her to fail. She thought of her grandmother, who had first taught her to play on an old upright piano with yellowed keys and slightly off-pitched notes. "Music isn't just in your fingers," she used to say. "It's in your heart. When you play from there, people listen." Olivia opened her eyes, straightened her back, and began to play. Her fingers moved across the keys with a gentle touch at first, the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filling the restaurant. The piece started deceptively simple, like a question being asked in musical form. She had chosen it carefully, not just because she knew it well, but because it told a story. It began softly, almost hesitantly, before building to passages of incredible technical difficulty and emotional power. Perfect for the moment. Behind her, she heard a quiet scoff. Westfield, no doubt. Unimpressed with the understated beginning, she ignored him, letting herself sink deeper into the music as the piece progressed. The first minute passed, the gentle introduction giving way to more complex phrases. Olivia's hands moved with increasing confidence, muscle memory taking over as she navigated the familiar territory. She had played this piece hundreds of times, in practice rooms, at recitals, in her tiny apartment on a digital keyboard with headphones, so as not to disturb her neighbors. It was like an old friend. As she approached the more technically demanding section, she felt a small surge of anxiety. It had been weeks since she'd practiced properly. What if her fingers stumbled? What if she proved Westfield right? But as the tempo increased and the dynamics grew stronger, something else took over. The restaurant, Westfield, her aching feet, the water spill, all of it fell away. There was only the music now, flowing through her like a current. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing sounds from the Steinway that it probably hadn't produced in years. The restaurant's weekend pianist played pleasant background jazz, not the soul-stirring classical repertoire the instrument was built for. Under Olivia's hands, the piano seemed to come alive, resonating with emotion that filled every corner of the space. 2 minutes in, she risked a glance up. The faces watching her had transformed. The discomfort and secondhand embarrassment were gone, replaced by something else: surprise, admiration, wonder. Even the kitchen staff had emerged, standing in a line by the swinging doors, momentarily forgetting about orders waiting to be delivered. Danny, who had offered to cover Olivia's tables, stood frozen with a tray of drinks, her mouth slightly open. James, the manager, had pressed himself against the wall, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning realization that he had seriously underestimated one of his employees. Olivia returned her attention to the keys, allowing herself to be fully present in the music as she approached one of the piece's most powerful sections. Her right hand flew through a cascade of notes while her left provided the harmonic foundation, the contrast creating a tension that was almost physical in the air of the restaurant. A water glass clinked somewhere, someone's hand trembling, perhaps. Otherwise, there wasn't a sound except for the piano. No one ate. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. As the piece built toward its climax, Olivia's body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her face reflecting the changing emotions of the composition. Joy, longing, defiance, all poured through her fingers into the keys. This wasn't just technical skill. This was artistry. Years of practice, sacrifice, and passion were evident in every note. She had almost forgotten about Westfield, until she caught a glimpse of his table during a brief moment when she opened her eyes. The 5 men sat motionless, their food untouched. One still held his fork suspended in midair, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing. Another had removed his glasses and was wiping his eyes discreetly with his napkin. And Westfield himself, his face had drained of color. The smug smile was long gone, replaced by a look of absolute astonishment. For a man who prided himself on being unimpressed, on having seen everything, on being above it all, he looked utterly shaken. Olivia felt a small spark of satisfaction, but it was quickly absorbed back into the music. This performance wasn't about him anymore. It was about the music itself, about sharing something beautiful with everyone in this room, even him. As she approached the final sections of the piece, she played with even greater abandon, her technical control allowing her to push the emotional boundaries of the music. The contrast between thundering bass notes and delicate high melodies created a conversation between different voices, all coming from her hands. The piece neared its conclusion, the final passages a triumphant declaration before resolving into the closing notes. Olivia's fingers danced across the keys one last time, bringing the ballad to its powerful end with a series of resonant chords that seemed to hang in the air, even after her hands had lifted from the keyboard. Then, silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire restaurant was collectively holding its breath. Then someone, Olivia couldn't see who, began to applaud. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause and cheers. People rose to their feet. Someone whistled. The elderly couple, who had watched with concern earlier, were both dabbing at their eyes with napkins. Olivia sat still for a moment, coming back to herself, to the restaurant, to reality. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted to get through the humiliating challenge without mistakes. Instead, she had given one of her best performances ever. She stood and gave a small, somewhat awkward bow, unused to receiving standing ovations while wearing a server's uniform. As the applause continued, she stepped away from the piano, uncertain what to do next. Return to work as if nothing had happened? That seemed impossible now. Danny rushed over, throwing her arms around Olivia. "Holy shit," she whispered fiercely in Olivia's ear. "That was incredible. Why didn't you ever tell us you could play like that?" Olivia shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It never came up?" James approached next, his expression a complicated mix of emotions. "Olivia, that was an exceptional, truly." He seemed at a loss for words. "Take a moment if you need it, but—" "I know," she said with a small smile. "Tables 7 and 12 need their check." He nodded, looking both relieved and somewhat ashamed. "Right. Yes." He hesitated, then added, "But tomorrow let's talk about possibly having you play here regularly, if you'd be interested." Before she could respond, a customer approached, the older woman from the concerned couple. "Young lady," she said, taking Olivia's hands in her own. "I taught piano for 40 years before I retired, and I have never heard an amateur play with such feeling. You have a remarkable gift." "Thank you," Olivia said, genuinely touched. As the woman returned to her table, Olivia became aware that she still had a job to do, including serving Westfield's table. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her uniform and made her way back toward them. The dynamic at the table had completely changed. Where before there had been loud laughter and dismissive glances, now there was a heavy silence. 2 of the men were looking at their phones, clearly uncomfortable. Another was eating mechanically, his eyes on his plate. The 4th was staring at Westfield, whose face remained unreadable. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" Olivia asked, her voice steady. 4 pairs of eyes looked up at her with varying degrees of admiration and embarrassment. Westfield's remained fixed on his untouched main course. "That was quite something," one of the men said finally. "Where did you study before the conservatory?" "I started with my grandmother," Olivia replied. "Then the community music program in Dorchester." "Remarkable," another said. "Simply remarkable." Westfield still hadn't spoken or looked at her. His fingers tapped against the tablecloth in what might have been the rhythm of the piece she had just played. "Your meals are getting cold," Olivia said gently. "Can I have anything reheated for you?" "We're fine," one of them answered quickly. "Thank you." She nodded and turned to go, but Westfield's voice stopped her. "Miss Taylor," she turned back. He was looking at her now, his expression difficult to read. "Yes, Mr. Westfield." His mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Richard Westfield seemed to be at a loss for words. "The piece," he finally said. "What was it called?" "Chopin's Ballet No. 1 in G minor," she answered. He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, the words sounding unpracticed, as though he rarely used them. Olivia gave a small nod in acknowledgement and walked away, aware that every eye in the restaurant was still following her. For the first time since she'd started working at Bellamy's, she stood completely straight, her gaze level, no longer trying to make herself invisible. The rest of Olivia's shift passed in a blur. Customers who'd witnessed her performance stopped her to offer compliments, press business cards into her hands, or simply smile in appreciation. Several left generous tips with notes scrawled on the receipts. "Bravo," and "beautiful playing," and "you made my evening." One customer, who introduced himself as a retired orchestra conductor, cornered her by the water station. "You should be on stage, not serving tables," he told her, his eyes bright with conviction. "When's your next recital?" "I'd like to attend," Olivia blushed. "Just a small student showcase next month at the conservatory. Nothing special." "I'll be there," he promised, writing down the date after she told him. "And I'm bringing friends." By closing time, Olivia was physically exhausted but mentally wired. The adrenaline from her impromptu performance still coursed through her veins, making her hands slightly shaky as she counted her tips. Tonight's earnings were nearly triple her usual amount, enough to cover next month's electric bill and maybe even splurge on a proper dinner instead of ramen noodles. Danny leaned against the locker beside her as they prepared to leave. "You know things are going to be different now, right?" "What do you mean?" Olivia asked, though she suspected she knew. "You can't go back to being invisible," Danny said, gesturing around the empty restaurant. "Not after that performance. Everyone's going to be talking about you. Customers will come in asking for the waitress who plays piano. James is already planning to advertise you as the restaurant's special talent." Olivia frowned. "I didn't agree to that." "Well, he's offering to pay you extra, like actual performers pay on top of your server wage." Danny raised her eyebrows. "That's not nothing, especially with your tuition bills." Olivia closed her locker, considering this new development. It wasn't what she'd planned. She'd deliberately kept her two worlds separate, waitress by night, pianist by day. Mixing them felt strange, as if the boundaries of her carefully compartmentalized life were dissolving. "And Westfield's table? What happened there?" Danny asked, lowering her voice despite the empty locker room. "After you went back to your other tables, I saw him talking to James." A knot formed in Olivia's stomach. "Talking about what?" "No idea. But he looked different. Not angry exactly. More like," Danny searched for the word, "thoughtful?" Which is weird for a guy who usually acts like the world exists to serve him. Olivia shouldered her bag, too tired to speculate. "Whatever. As long as he doesn't try to get me fired, I don't really care what he thinks." But as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted during that performance. For a moment, she'd forced Richard Westfield to see her, really see her, as a person with depth and skill and value. The memory of his stunned expression gave her a small, private satisfaction that she wasn't quite ready to dismiss. Outside, the late October air was brisk, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and coming frost. Olivia pulled her coat tighter around herself as she and Danny walked toward the T station. The streets of downtown Boston were quieter now, the weekend crowd having thinned after midnight. "Want to grab a coffee?" Danny asked, pointing to a 24-hour diner across the street. "I'm too wired to sleep anyway, and you look like you could use a chance to process everything." Olivia hesitated, mentally calculating the cost of coffee against her budget. As if reading her mind, Danny added, "My treat." "To celebrate your debut." "Fine, but I'm not having anything fancy," Olivia agreed with a small smile. The diner was nearly empty. Just a few night workers and students hunched over laptops in the corner booths. They slid into a worn vinyl booth by the window, ordering plain coffees that arrived in thick white mugs, steaming hot and surprisingly good. "So," Danny said after taking a sip, "tell me the truth. How good are you, actually? Like in the music world? Because to my untrained ear, that sounded professional level amazing." Olivia stared into her coffee. It was a question she'd avoided asking herself too directly. Hope was expensive in her experience, and she'd learned to keep her expectations modest. "I'm promising," she said finally. "My professors say I have potential, but the classical music world is incredibly competitive. For every successful concert pianist, there are hundreds just as talented who end up teaching elementary school music or playing hotel lobbies." "But you want it? The concert pianist life?" Olivia's hands wrapped around her mug, absorbing its warmth. "Since I was 8 years old. My grandmother took me to see a pianist named Yuja Wang perform with the Boston Symphony. The way she played, it was like watching someone fly. I'd never seen a black woman on that stage before. I didn't even know it was possible. She smiled at the memory. I told my grandmother that night I wanted to do that too. And she got you lessons. She couldn't afford them, but she had an old piano that had belonged to her mother and she knew the basics. She taught me what she could, then found a community music program that offered scholarships. Olivia took a sip of coffee. She worked 2 jobs to keep me in that program until I was good enough for the youth orchestra. She never missed a recital. She sounds amazing, Danny said softly. She was. Olivia blinked rapidly, looking away. She passed away last year. Heart attack. She never got to see me play at the conservatory. I'm sorry. Danny reached across the table to squeeze Olivia's hand. But I bet she'd be incredibly proud of you tonight. Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak for a moment. When she'd composed herself, she changed the subject. How were my tables after I went back to the piano? I hope you got decent tips, Danny laughed. Are you kidding? People were so moved by your playing they got generous with everyone. I made more tonight than I usually do on a weekend. You should cause scenes more often. They chatted for another half hour, finishing their coffees and sharing stories about their worst customer experiences. It felt good to unwind, to process the evening with someone who understood the strange world of service work. By the time they left the diner, Olivia felt calmer, the events of the night settling into perspective. They parted ways at the tea station, Danny heading north to her apartment in Somerville, while Olivia took the Red Line south. The subway car was nearly empty at this hour, just a few late-night workers dozing against windows or staring blankly at their phones. Olivia leaned her head against the cool glass, watching the underground darkness rush by, occasionally broken by the lights of passing stations. Her mind kept returning to the moment her fingers had first touched the keys of the Steinway, how the restaurant had fallen silent, how the music had poured out of her without conscious thought. It had been months since she'd played like that. Between work, classes, practice sessions focused on technical exercises, and the constant worry about money, she'd almost forgotten the pure joy of making music. Ironically, it had taken Westfield's attempt to humiliate her to remind her why she'd fallen in love with playing in the first place. When she reached her stop, she emerged from the station to find the streets of her neighborhood quiet and dark. Her apartment building was a 15-minute walk away, a slightly run-down triple-decker she shared with 4 other students to keep costs down. Usually the walk home after late shifts made her anxious, but tonight she barely noticed her surroundings, her mind still filled with music. As she climbed the creaky stairs to the 3rd floor, trying to be quiet for her sleeping roommates, her phone buzzed with a text. She fished it out of her pocket, expecting it to be Danny with a final thought about their conversation. Instead, it was from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Taylor, this is James Brooks from Bellamy's. I apologize for texting so late, but I've had an unusual request. Could you come in tomorrow at 2 p.m. to meet with me? It's important and potentially very good news. Please let me know if you can make it. Olivia stared at the message, her tiredness momentarily forgotten. What could be so important that her manager would text her at nearly 2 a.m.? And what did he mean by unusual request? Her mind immediately went to Westfield. Danny had said he'd spoken to James. Had he complained after all? Or was it something else entirely? She typed a quick reply, I can be there. Is everything okay? The response came almost immediately. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. I think you'll be pleased. See you at 2. Olivia unlocked her apartment door, slipping inside the dark, quiet space. Her roommates had left a small lamp on in the shared living area, casting just enough light for her to make her way to her tiny bedroom without stumbling over anything. Once inside, she sat on the edge of her bed, still holding her phone, rereading James's cryptic messages. Part of her wanted to be excited by his assurance that it was potentially very good news, but experience had taught her to be cautious with hope. Whatever was waiting for her tomorrow at 2 p.m., tonight had already been transformative in ways she couldn't fully process yet. She'd stood up to someone who'd tried to diminish her. She'd played from her heart in front of strangers. She'd been seen, really seen, perhaps for the first time since arriving at Bellamy's. As she finally lay down to sleep, the notes of Chopin's ballade still played in her mind, following her into dreams filled with music and applause and the astonished face of a man who had underestimated her for the first and last time. Olivia woke to sunlight streaming through her thin curtains. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the brightness. Usually she woke before dawn for her morning practice sessions, or slept until noon after late shifts. Today was different. She had the mysterious 2 p.m. meeting with James. The events of the previous night came flooding back. The water spill, Westfield's challenge,
The piano.
the applause. The text from James. She reached for her phone. 11:37 a.m., 3 hours until the meeting. Enough time to shower, practice a little, and maybe review for her music theory exam on Monday. Her roommate Lily was in the kitchen when Olivia emerged from her room, heating water for tea. "Morning, superstar," Lily said with a grin. "Danny texted me what happened last night. Said you basically turned into a concert pianist in the middle of your shift and left everyone with their jaws on the floor." Olivia rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. "She's exaggerating. Knowing you? I doubt it." Lily offered her a mug. "Tea? I've got that fancy Earl Grey you like." "Thanks." Olivia accepted the mug gratefully. "Did Danny tell you I have to go meet with my manager today?" "No idea what it's about, but he texted me at 2 a.m., which is weird." "Maybe they want to promote you to resident musician," Lily suggested, only half joking. "Pay you to class up the joint instead of just serving food." "Honestly, that wouldn't be terrible. The money would help." Olivia blew on her tea. "I'm behind on my practice time for my final recital. Professor Chen is starting to notice." "When is it again?" 6 weeks. December 10th. Just saying the date out loud made Olivia's stomach tighten. The winter recital was a major milestone for graduating students. A chance to perform for faculty, family, and sometimes even talent scouts from orchestras and music academies. "I've got the main piece down, but the secondary selections still need work." "You'll be amazing," Lily assured her. "You always are." Olivia wished she shared her roommate's confidence. In the practice rooms at school, surrounded by prodigies who'd been playing internationally since childhood, it was hard not to feel like an imposter. Many of her classmates came from musical families, had attended prestigious arts high schools, owned instruments worth more than everything Olivia had ever possessed combined. She'd fought for every opportunity, every lesson, every minute of practice time on the school's pianos. After finishing her tea, Olivia spent an hour at the small digital keyboard in her bedroom. It was a far cry from the Steinway at Bellamy's, with weighted keys that didn't quite capture the nuance of a real piano, but it was enough to keep her fingers limber. She worked through scales, then sections of the list piece she was preparing for her recital, trying to focus despite her mind continually wandering to the upcoming meeting. At 1:30, she changed into a simple blouse and her least-worn jeans, wanting to look presentable but not like she was trying too hard. She caught the tea with a few minutes to spare, arriving at Bellamy's at exactly 1:58 p.m. The restaurant was in its post-lunch lull, only a few tables occupied by lingering diners. A different set of servers worked the day shift, people Olivia knew only in passing during shift changes. They glanced at her with new interest as she walked in, whispering among themselves. Apparently, word of her performance had spread through the entire staff. James spotted her from his office doorway and waved her over, his expression uncharacteristically enthusiastic. "Olivia, right on time. Come in, please." His small office was cluttered with invoices, scheduling sheets, and vendor catalogs. He cleared a chair for her, moving a stack of papers to his already overflowing desk. "Thank you for coming in," he began, sitting across from her. "I know it's your day off." "Your text seemed important," Olivia said, trying to sound casual despite her curiosity. "It is." James leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "First, I want to apologize for last night. I should have stepped in sooner with Westfield. What he did was inappropriate, and as your manager, I should have protected you from that situation." Olivia hadn't expected an apology. She nodded, not sure what to say. "That said," James continued, "what happened afterward was remarkable. I've been managing restaurants for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. You transformed the entire atmosphere of the place." "Thank you," Olivia said, still uncertain where this was going. "After you left, customers were asking about you, who you were when you would play again. Several regulars said they'd come back specifically to hear you." He smiled. "Which brings me to why I asked you here today." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and opened it. "I'd like to offer you a position as our house pianist 3 nights a week, Friday and Saturday evenings, plus 1 weeknight of your choosing. 4-hour shifts, primarily playing, but with short breaks. You'd be paid $50 per hour, plus any tips customers leave specifically for the music. Olivia blinked, quickly calculating in her head. That was $600 a week, more than she made as a server for fewer hours and doing something she loved. That's very generous, she said carefully. But why the sudden offer? Bellamy's has never had a house pianist before. James shifted in his seat. Well, that brings me to the second reason I asked you here. He hesitated. After you left last night, Richard Westfield stayed behind to speak with me. He was different than his usual self. Quite humbled, actually. Olivia's eyebrows rose in surprise. He apologized for his behavior and then made an unusual request. He wanted to sponsor a pianist position at Bellamy's specifically for you, covering your salary for the first 6 months. James slid a check across the desk, and he left this for you personally. Olivia glanced down at the check and froze. It was made out to her for $10,000. I can't accept this, she said immediately, pushing it back across the desk. He anticipated you might say that, James replied. He was very clear that it wasn't charity or an apology payment. He called it an investment in talent and said there were no strings attached. He specifically asked me to tell you that you earned it with your playing, not because of the incident. Olivia stared at the check, conflicting emotions warring inside her. Pride told her to tear it up. Practicality reminded her how much she needed the money. Suspicion wondered what Westfield's real motives were. I don't understand, she said finally. Why would he do this? James shrugged. People aren't always what they seem, I suppose. Even Richard Westfield. He slid the check back toward her. For what it's worth, I've known him as a customer for years. He's never done anything like this before. Olivia picked up the check, examining it as if it might provide answers. The amount could cover her remaining tuition, with enough left over to finally buy the proper concert attire she needed for her recital and upcoming auditions. It could mean not having to choose between paying rent and practicing extra hours. It could change everything. You don't have to decide about the check right now, James said. But I do need an answer about the pianist position. We'd like to start advertising it this week. Olivia took a deep breath. Can I try it for a month and see how it works with my school schedule? And I'd need flexibility around exam periods and my final recital in December. Absolutely, James agreed quickly. We can work with your schedule. Does that mean you're accepting? I'm accepting the job, Olivia clarified. The check? I need to think about that, James nodded. Fair enough. When can you start? This Friday works, she said, still feeling slightly dazed by how quickly her life seemed to be changing. Perfect. He handed her the formal offer letter. I'll have HR email you the paperwork. As she left James's office, check and offer letter in hand, Olivia noticed a small commotion at the front of the restaurant. 2 elegant older women had entered, looking around with interest. One of them spotted Olivia and nudged her companion. Excuse me, the woman called out, approaching Olivia. Are you the pianist from last night? The young lady who played Chopin? Olivia nodded, surprised to be recognized. Yes, ma'am. I knew it, the woman said triumphantly to her friend. Didn't I say she had remarkable presence? She turned back to Olivia. My dear, we were sitting in the corner last night. My husband is on the board of the Boston Symphony Orchestra's Young Artist Program. He couldn't stop talking about your performance. Oh, Olivia said, genuinely startled. Thank you. He's asked me to give you this. The woman handed Olivia a business card. He'd very much like you to audition for the spring showcase. It's quite competitive, but he's very particular about talent, and he was most impressed. Olivia accepted the card. Reading the embossed name, Philip Henderson, Board of Directors, Boston Symphony Orchestra. Thank you, she managed to say. I'll definitely call, the woman beamed at her. Wonderful. We've come for lunch specifically hoping to see you again. Will you be playing today? Not today, Olivia replied, still processing everything. But I'll be starting as the house pianist this Friday evening. We'll be back then, the woman promised, squeezing Olivia's hand warmly before rejoining her friend. Olivia walked out of Bellamy's in a daze, clutching the check, offer letter, and business card. The bright autumn afternoon felt surreal, as if she'd stepped into someone else's life. 24 hours ago, she'd been an anonymous waitress, struggling to balance work and school, invisible to customers like Richard Westfield. Now she had a job as a pianist, a check that could solve her financial problems, and a potential audition with people connected to the Boston Symphony. All because one arrogant man had tried to humiliate her and failed spectacularly. As she walked toward the T station, Olivia pulled out her phone to call Danny, then hesitated. Instead, she dialed a different number, the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. It had been weeks since her last visit, but suddenly it felt important to go there today. To sit beside the simple headstone and share the news, even if only symbolically. "Hello," she said when the office answered. "What time are you open until today? I'd like to visit my grandmother." 6 months had passed since that fateful night at Bellamy's. The late April afternoon was warm, cherry blossoms drifting through the air as Olivia walked the familiar path from the T station to Symphony Hall. Her steps were confident now, no longer hesitant like they'd been the first time she'd come for her audition. So much had changed in half a year. After careful consideration, she had deposited Westfield's check, using it to pay her final semester's tuition and to buy a proper concert dress. A deep blue gown that complemented her skin tone and allowed her arms the freedom to move as she played. The remainder she'd saved for graduate school applications, a dream that now seemed within reach. The pianist position at Bellamy's had transformed her daily life. Playing 3 nights a week, she earned enough to quit her waitressing shifts entirely, giving her more time to practice and focus on her studies. More importantly, she was building a reputation. Regular patrons came specifically to hear her play, leaving generous tips and requesting favorite pieces. Music students from the conservatory started showing up, watching her techniques with admiring eyes. A few local musicians had even asked if she'd consider collaborating on projects, but today wasn't about Bellamy's. Today was her debut, with the Boston Symphony Orchestra's Young Artists Showcase, a prestigious opportunity that Philip Henderson had helped secure for her after a rigorous audition process. She approached Symphony Hall. Olivia paused to take in the magnificent building. Built in 1900, it was one of the world's most acoustically perfect concert halls. Its classic architecture a testament to the enduring power of music. How many great pianists had walked through these same doors over the decades? The thought both humbled and excited her. Inside, she was directed to the performers' area backstage. Other young musicians were already there, violinists running through difficult passages, a cellist adjusting her strings, a flautist assembled his instrument with methodical precision. All of them conservatory students like herself, all exceptional talents carefully selected for this showcase. Olivia Taylor, a stage manager with a clipboard, approached her. "You're on in 30 minutes. Piano's been tuned this morning, but you have 15 minutes to familiarize yourself with it now, if you'd like." "Thank you," Olivia said, suddenly aware of her dry throat. The stage was empty when she walked out, the vast hall stretching before her with its rows of empty seats. In a few hours, those seats would be filled with music lovers, critics, and talent scouts from across the Northeast. The thought made her stomach tighten. The concert grand piano waited center stage, a magnificent Steinway worth more than her family's house had been. She sat on the bench, adjusting it to her height, then placed her hands on the keys without pressing down, just feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. She played a few scales, testing the action and response of the keys, then a brief passage from her showcase piece, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. The piano sang under her touch, the notes ringing out with perfect clarity in the empty hall. "Beautiful instrument, isn't it?" The voice startled her. She looked up to see Philip Henderson walking down the center aisle toward the stage, a gentle smile on his lined face. "It's incredible," she agreed. "Like it plays itself," he chuckled. "That's what all the great pianists say, that the best instruments disappear between the musician and the music." He stopped at the edge of the stage. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous?" "Terrified," Olivia admitted with a small laugh. "But in a good way." "That's exactly right," he said approvingly. "The day you stop feeling nervous before a performance is the day you should quit. It means you've stopped caring enough." Olivia nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I just wanted to check in before things get busy," Philip continued, "and to tell you that you've earned this spot completely on merit. Your audition was extraordinary." "Thank you," Olivia said, warmed by his words. "There's someone else who wanted to wish you luck, but he wasn't sure you'd want to see him." Philip hesitated. "Richard Westfield is here." He asked me to tell you he's attended every one of your performances at Bellamy's, always sitting in the back where you wouldn't notice him. He's quite become your champion in certain circles." Olivia's hand stilled on the keys. She hadn't seen Westfield since that night 6 months ago, though she'd heard from James that he still came to the restaurant regularly on nights when she played. "He's here?" she asked, unsure how to feel about this information. Philip nodded. "He's been a major donor to our young artist program for years. That's how I know him. After hearing you play at Bellamy's that night, I was there too, though you wouldn't remember me. He approached me specifically about having you audition." He smiled at her surprised expression. "Don't worry, I would have selected you anyway. Your talent speaks for itself." Olivia processed this revelation. All these months, she'd thought her opportunity with the Boston Symphony had come from the elderly couple who'd approached her at Bellamy's. To learn that Westfield had been involved behind the scenes was unsettling, yet somehow fitting. Their paths seemed strangely intertwined now. "I'd like to thank him," she said finally. "After the performance, if possible." "I'll let him know," Philip replied, looking pleased. "Now I'll leave you to your preparation. The hall opens to the public in an hour. You're the final performer of the evening, the position of honor." After he left, Olivia remained at the piano, running through difficult passages of her piece, but her mind kept returning to Westfield. What a complex circle they had traveled, from humiliation to triumph, from antagonism to something like respect. She still didn't fully understand his motives, but perhaps she didn't need to. Sometimes people revealed their true character in unexpected ways. The minutes ticked by quickly. Before she knew it, she was back in the green room, listening to the hall fill with the murmur of hundreds of voices. The other young musicians performed one by one, each returning backstage with flushed cheeks and relieved smiles, and then it was her turn. "Our final performer this evening," the announcer's voice echoed through the hall, "is pianist Olivia Taylor, performing Franz Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 in C-sharp minor." Applause greeted her as she walked onto the stage, a sound like gentle rain. The lights were bright, making it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, but she felt their presence, hundreds of people waiting to hear her play. As she sat at the piano, adjusting her gown and the bench height one last time, a strange calm settled over her. This moment, this exact moment of potential and anticipation, was what she'd been working toward her entire life. All the late nights practicing, the early mornings before class, the tired fingers and financial struggles and moments of doubt, all of it had led her here. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening of the Liszt was slow and majestic, like a storyteller setting the scene before the adventure begins. Olivia let herself sink into the music, feeling each note as a living thing beneath her fingers. As the piece progressed into its more technically demanding sections, her hands flew across the keyboard, years of disciplined practice allowing her to navigate the complex runs and crashing chords with confidence. Unlike at Bellamy's, where she'd played from raw emotion, tonight she played with both heart and careful intention, shaping each phrase exactly as she'd envisioned during countless hours of preparation. The hall's perfect acoustics carried every note to the farthest seats, the magnificent Steinway responding to her slightest touch. When she reached the famous Friska section, the wild, racing finale that had challenged pianists for generations, she surrendered completely to the music's frenzied energy. Her hands became a blur over the keys, drawing gasps from the audience as she executed the piece's most difficult passages with seeming effortlessness. The final chords rang out triumphantly, and then silence. That magical moment between the end of a performance and the audience's response, when time itself seemed suspended. Then came the applause. Not polite appreciation, but genuine enthusiasm. People rising to their feet, the sound swelling until it filled the hall completely. Olivia stood and bowed, her heart pounding with exhilaration and relief. As she straightened, her eyes adjusted to the lights enough to make out faces in the front rows. Philip was there, beaming with approval, and several rows back, standing with the rest of the audience, was Richard Westfield. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave her a small, respectful nod, acknowledgement from one professional to another. Olivia took a final bow and exited the stage, the applause following her. Backstage, the other young musicians offered congratulations and admiring comments. The stage manager handed her a bouquet of flowers, whispered that several important people wanted to meet her at the reception. But amid the excitement, Olivia found herself thinking of her grandmother. How proud she would have been to see her granddaughter on this stage, playing with this orchestra. The journey wasn't over. This was just the beginning of her professional career, but tonight marked a significant milestone. Later, at the reception, she would speak with Westfield, thank him for his unexpected support, perhaps even gain some understanding of the man behind the arrogant facade. She would network with conductors and music directors, take the business cards pressed into her hands, begin to build the professional relationships that would shape her future. But for now, as she stood in the wings listening to the continued applause, Olivia simply allowed herself to feel the pure joy of the moment, the knowledge that her talent, once used against her, had ultimately set her free.